Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the first edition of the Red and White Authority. I'm Art Regner, Detroit broadcaster. Let's just put it that way. Work at WDFN, formerly at FoxSportsDetroit.com, along with Kevin Allen, the Hockey Hall of Fame journalist from USA Today, and a very special guest on our first show from HockeyBuzz.com, Eklund. And this is a show that we'll talk primarily about the Detroit Red Wings, but obviously all kinds of happenings in the NHL, as you can tell. Two of my favorite books, Ball 4, I think the book that started it all, and of course, Custer and the his Last Stand, because this thing could turn out to be a massacre. But let's get to last night's game. Red Wings played very, very well, then gave a couple of goals, and had to fight to get a point. Let's go with you. It looks like it was pretty good, actually. Red Wings phenomenal against the Western. Keep doing it.
Yeah, no, that was a game that I thought the Red Wings had control of for 2 periods, and then let it get away. And they have such dread, as you know, to go to the shootout. And I thought Jimmy Howard had gotten past what I call the yips, in the shootout for him, because it's interesting. It's not about breakaways. We saw him actually stop a breakaway earlier in that game. Even since he's come back, he's made some big stops on breakaways. But the shootout, and I've talked about it on other podcasts, I think it's very similar when the second baseman has trouble getting the ball to first base, or a PGA performer has trouble with the 1-foot putts. I think that's what we have with the Jimmy Howard in the shootout, because historically he's been either average or above average as in terms of the shootout. So I think they have such dread that it's become like the New Jersey Devils last season, when they went through that and they couldn't win a shootout, and the more they thought about it, the worse it got.
Well, it was an interesting game. Eklund, I want to get your opinion on it, because once the Red Wings go to a shootout, everyone in Detroit expects them to lose, and everyone looks at Jimmy Howard, who, I know he, rebound control, those shots were high, but if you can give us more of what do you think the national perspective is of Jimmy Howard, because he always gets raked over the coals, especially after the Red Wings lose a shootout?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Was that for me directly? I'm sorry. My perspective, Jimmy Howard is really an underrated goalie in many ways, and I think the general feeling of he spent such a long time, getting there. The Red Wings bring up their goalies; they take such a long time bringing them up, and they had great goalies, so they didn't need to rush him. That I think that is sort of has curbed the enthusiasm from him when he first came into the league. But I think he's underrated, and I think only when you talk to Detroit people do you get a sense of how important he is to the Red Wings. Besides that, I think you think of the Red Wings nationally as a team that doesn't really rely on their goalies. That the goalie is sort of just where most teams totally rely on their goalies. I don't think the Red Wings nationally have a perspective. We don't think Howard's all that much, and only really Detroit people get a chance to see how good he is.
Kevin, that's probably what Eklund's saying. Probably goes back to the theory that for years the Red Wings were always able, even with Dominik Hasek, especially the second time he came back to Detroit, they don't put as much money into the goaltending position, but they really sink money into the defensive corps. I've heard Kenny Holland say it once. I've heard him say it 1 billion times, is that, we need somebody to stop the puck, but we really need quality defensemen, and that has kind of been their mantra over the years, which I guess leads me to my next question, and that is come trade deadline, do you think the Red Wings will add to their defense, especially the much coveted right-handed shot that Mike Babcock seems to yearn for?
Well, I think it's still on the radar, but I think it's less of a priority than it was at the start of the season. When we came into the season, the drumbeat was they were going to get it done. They were going to get a right-hand shot defenseman. Mike Green was the one that everybody seemed to target. The thought was, come a trade deadline, the Capitals, probably would be bumping along, and they probably weren't going to re-sign Green. But the problem with that thinking, obviously, was the Capitals have become a pretty competitive team. And meanwhile, the Red Wings' defense has been much better than people anticipated at the start of the season, and more importantly, the power play is the best in the league. So you don't no longer have to worry about that the point man on the power play, which was a big concern. But saying all that, I think that the Red Wings will look at their options on trade deadline day. I think They have historically liked to land a veteran defenseman to give them more depth. And I think if the prices fall, I do not think they'll give up any of their prize prospects or their first. And I think they're very reluctant even to give up a second-round pick. But I think if they could get something for a third-round pick or a B prospect, then I would see them landing, a defenseman. I think it's going to be more like the Mahalik type defenseman. I don't see him, making a bold pitch to get Yandel or anything of that nature. I see him trying to get a depth guy that can come in and either be in the third pairing or even be in a number 7 guy insurance policy, in case one of the younger players falters.
On last night's broadcast, they did a lot about Marchenko, who is a right-handed shot, has a little bit of size, seemed to have it already down how to block shots. He doesn't seem to be afraid to put his body in front of the puck. Do you think that Marchenko's play has, and that was kind of what they alluded to on the telecast last night, might have made the Red Wings, you know what, we're going to go and see what we have right now. If something comes our way, but they might just stand pat.
Well, they may, but I think they'll move the bushes around a little bit, see what's in there. But they could. I mean, I think they're pleased with their team. They think it's a competitive team. Marchenko's an interesting younger player because he also played in the KHL. And although you can certainly make a strong case that the AHL is stronger than the KHL, I think what happens for a Russian player over there is there's a lot of exposure in facing pressure when you're in the KHL. You're playing in your home country. There's a lot of coverage of that league, and I think it sort of matures players a little bit. I think players who played in the KHL, younger Russians, come over here just a little bit more ready than, say, a younger player rising up. So I think he looks poised on the ice because I think he feels like he's already been playing at a high level, and I think that really helps him. That it doesn't seem quite the leap for him psychologically. So, and I think he's a guy that understands his strengths and weaknesses. That's pretty clear. He doesn't try to do more than he's capable of doing, and I think right now that's kind of what they want from that position.
Look,
a name too, if I could. I honestly, I've been watching closely in Philadelphia as Kimmo Timonen's been returning from injury, and he looks amazing in practices. He really does. He's flying out there, and I get the impression he wants to be moved to a contender. It seems like the perfect kind of player that the Red Wings would grab. It seems like the kind of, now the question is, he's not going to play until Saturday. He's not going to officially play in the game until Saturday. That's 2 days before the trade deadline. You're going to get one shot to see him, or maybe two. I can't remember if the Flyers play Sunday. But yeah, I think he's a perfect fit for the Red Wings, in my opinion.
Well, you know who he's kind of like. He's kind of the Finnish version of Brian Rafalski. He's a transition defenseman. Can move the puck out of the zone much better one-on-one than he's ever really gotten credit for. Good. Finnish players have a pretty good grasp on defensive hockey. Finnish hockey is defensive hockey. So he would be a Red Wing style of player. They do not have any salary cap issues. They've got room to add whoever they need to add. But the big question would be the cost and just how ready is he to play. He's been off a long time. We're only going to see him for a game before the trade.
I think it's worth a shot. I mean, the cost, and I don't think the cost will be that high. I get the impression the Flyers, while they're going to want to get something for him, there are not going to be that many teams that are going to be able to do it, and there's also going to, the Red Wings are in a unique position there, and also the fact that I think the Flyers will basically respect his wishes as to where he wants to go, and I think Detroit's a team that he would go to.
When you that would be great. I think he does fit into the Red Wings style of play, but if you look at the Red Wings as a whole, and Eklund, let's get in on this again because it's great to have you on, and I'm kind of curious because the Red Wings have surprised virtually everybody, I think including themselves. From a national perspective, I'm kind of getting a feeling that people are more accepting of the Red Wings and where this club is at than people actually here in Detroit. That, hey, it's Detroit. They draft well. They're a great organization. They might be one of the best in all of professional sport, regardless of leagues. Do you think that this Red Wing team is a legitimate contender for the Stanley Cup, and how much have they surprised you with this rebuilding on the fly?
They're one of those teams that surprises you, and then when you look back on it, you're mad at yourself for being surprised, if that makes any sense, because you actually see what they have. They have that perfect blend of veteran guys who've been around and who can play it, combined with young guys who are coming up along the ranks, combined with solid goaltending, great coaching, and they're in the Eastern Conference, which is wide open for anyone really to win. Montreal made a trade today, I think, to try to win the Eastern. I mean, teams are just the East is wide open for the Red Wings, and there's a lot of respect for Detroit. And they absolutely are one of those teams that everybody just accepts is going to be good no matter what they do. You're no longer you're going to for how many years did everyone write, oh, this is the year the Red Wings are getting old? That's no longer being written anymore. This year's the first year you really didn't hear that. So yeah, I think the respect is there for sure, and they've got a really good shot.
Well, Kevin, I mean, Eklund brings up an interesting point. I think the respect is there, but if you look at the Red Wings' record and the teams that they're actually going to have to go against in the playoffs, they're not that impressive against the Eastern Conference. They own the Western Conference. It is amazing. I know they kind of blew a game last night, but did end up getting a point out of it, and they play the Kings tonight, which should be pretty tough. LA seems to be starting to roll, and then good old friend Todd McClellan and the Sharks are down the road, and then they end this big long road trip with Nashville. But how good are they? Because their record against the Eastern Conference, and primarily they're either going to end up playing Montreal or Tampa Bay, two teams that they haven't performed well against this season. Will that predicate them to make a move to compete with those teams, even though if they were in the Eastern Conference, heck, they could be so far out ahead even of Nashville, as well as Nashville's been playing?
Yeah, no, it's it's really bizarre because I think there was a feeling by fans is not only was it going to be great for television viewing, you don't have to stay up till 10 o'clock at night for playoff games now, but that the East was weaker at that point and that the Red Wings were going to rock and roll. And that hasn't happened. In fact, Eklund and I have discussed on other podcasts about how the East has gotten stronger, and the Red Wings have matchup problems within their own division. They don't match up well with Tampa Bay, and they don't seem to match up well with Montreal. I mean, both of those teams are different as well. I mean, Montreal is really just doing it on goaltending and strong defensive play. Carey Price has been unbelievable. In the last 10 games, he's only given up 11 goals. And Tampa Bay is a puck possession team. It's like playing against yourselves. Yzerman has brought in a bunch of guys that can move the puck and handle the puck, and their defense has really improved. And they got a really big goalie in net that doesn't seem to get a lot of room. But the one thing I would say about the Red Wings is that with the group that they still have, and there's some carryover guys, like the core of this group is now Tatar and Nyquist and Sheehan, and the players are sort of slowly but surely sort of taking over. But the old guard is still there in some extent, and one of the things they were known for, and you know this to be true, Art, is that when challenges would arise, they would meet those challenges. That's kind of what they're about. So my point would be, even though they do not have a good record against the Eastern Conference, I think they feel they have a chance, and I don't believe they feel they can't make enough changes to suddenly become the perfect matchup for Montreal and Tampa Bay. So I think they just have to count on this group, rising up. And what they've accomplished by getting into the playoffs every season, it really is remarkable. And I think you realize that when you think that the San Jose Sharks are the only other team who's made the postseason every season since the 2004-05 lost season, and now they may miss this season. So now the Red Wings are continued to roll with their long streak, because it was 24 years, right?
Yeah.
And there's no other team that has even made the playoffs every year since 2004-05. So it's really remarkable what they've done, and I think even though they do not have a good record against the East, I still think they are a threat in the postseason.
Well, Holland has always said, and I can throw it up, like both of you guys can comment on this, is Ken Holland said, listen, we may have to alter our style of play in the Eastern Conference. We're not sure how our style, puck possession, up and down, we don't fight much, we're not known as a real physical team, although we think we're tough to play against, that it might take years to kind of morph into an Eastern Conference team. Yet, if you look back at it, a lot of teams, especially the Blackhawks, kind of molded themselves into the Red Wings. Do you think if the Red Wings continue to play like this, that it will change the style of the conference, or do you see them eventually having to get maybe a little less finesse and a little more grit?
I think.
Go
Go ahead.
ahead.
Go
Oh, I
ahead.
think it's cyclical. I think the whole thing is cyclical. The whole puck possession, playing. I think if you draw, I think it's been by different names going back through the years. It'd be a great story to write sometime. Just just the idea of how this all works. But I think the Red Wings have managed to. I think the league is coming around to their style, and I think the Eastern Conference is actually moving more towards them than they have to move towards the East. That's my opinion.
Well,
Yeah.
Eklund, a real quick follow-up then. And do you think that the teams that they happen to play, although, I mean, Montreal and Montreal's a pretty wide-open club, and I guess Tampa is. Why do you think Detroit then has problems within their own division? I mean, if they can get out of their own division, they could quite possibly actually win the Stanley Cup, but getting out of their division looks like it's going to be extremely tough.
Montreal's it's just all about beating Carey Price, and that's really what it comes down to. As good as they are, I mean, it comes down to getting a ton of shots from every angle, shooting from everywhere is how to beat Carey Price, not your standard shots, but shooting from everywhere, and outworking the Canadians, which is hard to do. They're the hardest working team in the league, in my opinion. So the Canadians are tough, and with Tampa, I think it is a kind of a mirror image. I think Kevin's got that right on. And the one thing that Detroit has going for them in that series, if I was to look at that series, is the experience still. They still have the playoff experience. They still have the people who've been through this that Tampa doesn't have. And and Howard has, we haven't seen Bishop in a playoff series yet. There's a lot. Howard's been through this, so I would like Detroit's chances in the playoffs.
Kevin, your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think if you're the Red Wings, I think you would rather face Tampa Bay than Montreal because Montreal. It is all about Carey Price there, and Carey Price has been real good this season. And they're at a goaltending when you're sizing up the pros and cons of the series. You got to give the goaltending edge in that series to Montreal, just because Carey Price has played like a Vezina Trophy winner. And in the Tampa series, I think it's both. It's even. Here's the odd thing about, and I'd love to get to Eklund's perspective on this. The odd thing about Jimmy Howard is that it still feels like he's just now establishing himself, but he's 30 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like just because he got such a late start, the way they do things in Detroit, he's 30 years old already, and by now, we should know what he's all about. But there is, and when you look at his record, he's been decent in the postseason. He's not been a poor, playoff goalie. But I'm just saying, you still don't quite know exactly how well he'll play in the postseason, and obviously Bishop has no history. So, and Tampa Bay has had some injuries on the blue line, and you know what their offense is all about. But I think the Red Wings are pretty happy with their offense as well. The one thing I would say is, I think I've sensed that there is a movement within the Red Wings organization that they do need to start adding more players like Justin Abdicator. They need some guys who can play the puck possession game, but also has some grit and size. Similar to what the conclusion that the Penguins reached this season when they said, it might help us to get a little more belligerent. And they are difficult to play against. They can take whatever you throw at them, but they're not a heavy hitting team. And maybe they'd like to add one or two guys. They don't want to change the way they play hockey, but I think they would like to add a couple of more guys like Justin.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think you're right to a degree, and then part of me, first of all, Jimmy Howard, I've always felt like the Red Wings need a goalie who's not going to lose games for them, right? That's the kind of goalie he is. He's not going to let in that bad goal. He's not going to win a game for them necessarily, but he has won games for them. When I talk to Red Wings people, they tell me he's won lots of games. I don't see them enough to know, but he's not going to lose games for you. And in similar way to Carey Price, he needs. This is the first year. I think this year and last year from the Olympics on, Carey Price's confidence. He finally started believing in himself that he didn't care anymore that he was the Montreal Canadiens goalie. He knew he was good, and that was it. And he was good. And I think I don't know Howard as well as you guys do to know if he's got that same kind of confidence that he feels like he's there, because that's really what I think he would need to be that kind of goalie, that dominant goalie.
Well, I look at it this way. Talking to Jimmy at the beginning of training camp back in August, and Kevin, I don't know if you've got this feeling too. He just had the birth of his second child, another son, and I think after last year, where a lot of people, especially here in Detroit, had pretty much given up on him, that he seems to be much more confident or have much more resolve than he has at any time. However, I think that there's still a large segment, and this is probably, you could say this for any NHL team, you know, in all 30 cities, they probably will say this, but I still think that there's a lot of doubt about Jimmy Howard here in Detroit, and one of the reasons is because Peter Mrazek has just ignited. It's like the backup quarterback, you know, on any NFL team. Everybody in Detroit loves him. They expect Mrazek to just kind of walk in and take the job from Howard, who's under contract, I believe, for what? At least 4 more seasons after this one for the Wings.
Yeah, and at a good price as well. You know, what is interesting about Jimmy Howard is when you look at his advanced statistics, and the goalie stats for advanced statistic are like even strength, save percentage, and shorthanded save percentage. Like, he measures up really, really well. You know, I remember at the start of the season seeing some stats that showed that when you look at even strength save percentage, Jonathan Quick is a middle of the road goalie, and Jimmy Howard was in the top 5 or 6 goalies just over the last few seasons. You know, that he's really good at even strength. So you know, I think there are a lot of reasons to like Howard, and I think the players have confidence in him, and the fact that Mrazek has been blocked from getting into the league by Howard kind of says it all. I mean, because he's a quality young goalie, and you know, at some point, like the Red Wings may be faced with the decision of maybe trading Mrazek, because you know, it doesn't seem like he's going to get the opportunity as long as Howard keeps rolling.
Kevin, it sounds like you have a lot of confidence and think that Jimmy Howard is capable of leading Detroit to a Stanley Cup. Yet that is not the prevalent feeling. So all his naysayers, all his detractors out there, what would you say? I think you just gave a litany of reasons of why Jimmy is a quality goaltender, but he seems to have problems here in this city. He has as many detractors as he has fans. How can you kind of quell that storm a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think all goalies in Detroit have issues at various times. But the only guy I can remember was kind of Dominic Hasek, when everybody believed in him. But you know, Chris Osgood won a lot of games in his NHL career and was a quality goalie, but they didn't love him every day.
People going after Carey Price in Montreal, though, Kevin. I think that's like I think that's an NHL issue.
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, exactly. And but you know, but Howard is a big, poised goalie, and the only his biggest problem was he had rebound control issues, which I believe he's sort of overcome, and I think he's a pretty steady, you know, performer now. You know, he was playing at a very high level earlier in the season, before he got injured. Like that injury that he went through, you know, and it looked a lot worse even than it ended up being. But he was out for an extended period, and now I think he's still just trying to get back to shape. But I think he's certainly capable of being able to win a Can't Stanley Cup. Like, do you see like Corey Crawford as being a better goalie than Jimmy Howard? I really don't. And you know, he won a Stanley Cup, so I think he's right there. You know, where does he rank? You know, probably somewhere around in the 10-11 range, maybe among the top 30 goalies, somewhere in there.
I think for him to get that respect, he's going to have a long playoff run like Corey Crawford did. You know, I think that's what it comes down to, because especially nationally, like, you're not going to get a Jimmy Howard fan base going until Crawford's a great example, because I really was not a Corey Crawford fan. I thought they made a mistake trading the Emmy. I thought they were or not re-signing the Emmy. I really was not a Crawford guy, and honestly, I think he's one of the best goalies in the NHL right now, one of the top 5. And I've been incredibly impressed by Crawford. He's won me over, but it took a long playoff run watching him play every day, you know, from a person who's not watching him play to really get that way. I've not gotten that same thing with Howard. How's Howard viewed in the whole chain of U.S. goalies, Kevin? That's one of the things I was always curious about, because you know that's kind of, you're really tied into that U.S. hockey.
Yeah, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, during the Olympic selection process, David Poyle, who was the GM, went to bat heavily for him. He had seen him a lot when he was in Nashville, because they were in the same conference with him, and he was a big believer in him. Like he said, like, I've seen him in pressure games, and he's very poised. And he, you know, his size expands. Like some goalies are big goalies and they seem smaller. Howard's a big goalie who does seem to be big, in net. And he even when Howard started to struggle a little bit, like if everyone remembers, Ben Bishop was having an incredible year. And I remember at one point during the selection process, Don Waddell, pointed out, look, I've scouted Bishop, and Bishop has been good, all the way through here. And but they stuck to their guns because they believed in Howard as the third goalie. And one of the points that everybody made is that we have to take a third goalie that we are not afraid to use. We have to make this selection based on the idea that maybe this guy will have to play, and they took Howard. So I think the Americans feel are bullish on Howard.
Fellas, this is the Red and White Authority, our first podcast. Art Regner, along with Kevin Allen. Our special guest is Eklund from HockeyBuzz.com. I know we're going to have to wrap it up. We're kind of an overview show today, jumping around, but one of the issues that hasn't gone away, it's been constantly talked about, and thank heaven the Wings don't play the Toronto Maple Leafs for the remainder of the year, is Mike Babcock and his future. Kevin, you and I have talked about this. Eklund, we really want to get your thoughts on this as well. I think where the Red Wings are, I think that Babcock really does like this team. In the beginning of the year, I would have said he's not coming back. Now I'm leaning towards that he will somehow get a deal done with the Wings, even though I believe he probably will take it to term, hit the free agent market, but somehow, some way, he's behind the Detroit bench next season.
Yeah, well, I agree with that assessment as well. I think there are many factors of that. I think he likes living in the Detroit area, but more importantly, I think he likes this team. This is a good young team on the rise. If you look at his Toronto option, that's not a good option. They're going to strip it down to the chassis. I will tell you, though, and I know Eklund will support me on this because I think he feels it as I do. The thing, if you're a Detroit fan and you like Babcock, you have to worry about is the potential atom bomb dropping if the Philadelphia Flyers decide to fire Craig Berube. And Ed Schneider is very much like Mike Ilitch. He's an older gentleman. He wants to be contention now, and I think he would appreciate that Mike Babcock is, arguably the best coach in the NHL. And I could see him making a bold move and offering him a lot of money.
Yeah, I think that's a definite possibility. And then there's so many things that point to it that in retrospect will say, wow, if this ever happens, you should have seen that. Like, for example, the fact that Craig Berube has been safe all year, which is despite the fact the Flyers haven't been playing that well, points to that. The other thing is there's a big issue here. The last three coaches the Flyers have had. Okay, you got John Stevens, who's an assistant coach for the Kings. They've won 2 Stanley Cups. Peter Laviolette, who's the number one team in the league right now. Ken Hitchcock is the number 2 team in the league right now, right? So you have the last three coaches the Flyers have had have all gone on to incredible successes. That's not playing too well in the fact that we've let these guys go. And I think that there's a definite possibility that they will throw the bank at Babcock. And it'll be up to whether he wants to stay in Detroit or not. It may drive up the price for Detroit. And then the Flyers have a team. They have an interesting team. They have an interesting young group of players. It's not the Maple Leafs. And I agree with Kevin on the Maple Leafs. There's a lot more going on in Philadelphia. There's a lot more prospects. There's a lot more possibilities here. So yeah, that is the one team I think that I would look out for.
Well, that's interesting, Kevin. And let's get your perspective on this. Mr. Ilitch usually does throw money. We see it with the Tigers. We see it obviously with the Red Wings too. If it's a money issue, will Detroit? Because if Philly throws like $5 million a season at him, will the Red Wings match that, or are they confident that Jeff Blashill down in Grand Rapids is a guy that, okay, Mike, hey, it was fun. You have 10 years here. That's a long time for a coach at any professional level. Sayonara, buddy. Let's bring Blash in.
Well, it would seem like that's a simple question because you're absolutely right. Historically, Mike Ilitch has never let money stand in the way of what he was trying to accomplish. And, we've seen that with his baseball team, and we have seen it with the Red Wings. However, what we don't know is, again, Mr. Ilitch has long been about respect and doing things what he perceives to be the right way, and how will he feel if Mike Babcock, pushes and makes it all about money? I don't know. Will he be offended? I just can't answer that. But historically, you would say that he wouldn't be outbid, that he would get the guy. But they do like Blashill. They like him a lot, and rightfully so. He won a Calder championship. He's a good quality young coach from the the Detroit area. He's a disciple of the way that Babcock has played. The one thing you hear in Detroit all the time is when the younger players come up, they're ready to go, they're well schooled, they like them. So, it just comes to a matter of, what's the breaking point for the Red Wings.
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that one. Gentlemen, I think we've reached our time limit. Eklund, thank you for joining us. I know we'll have you on more podcasts of the Red and White Authority. Kevin, it's always a pleasure. Perhaps let's shoot maybe for our next one on Friday after the Red Wings play the Kings. I have a little procedure I have to go through tomorrow, and then Thursday they play San Jose, so leading up to the Nashville game to the trade deadline. Gentlemen, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for viewing and listening to the Red and White Authority episode number 1. We'll see you. Thanks.